Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 1 of Sex, Violence, and War. Today, we will be covering the story of Jack the Ripper. London, 1888, the largest city on earth. By day, it was the center of the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Its banks controlled global finance. Its docks bustled with ships from every corner of the world. The wealthy lived in elegant neighborhoods, attended lavish dinners, and believed they were living in the pinnacle of civilization. But only a few miles away, another London existed. A London of hunger, a London of overcrowded lodging houses, a London where entire families squeezed into a single room and thousands of people slept wherever they could afford a bed, or the streets if they couldn't. This was the East End, and at its heart was Whitechapel. If you walked its streets after dark, you'd find narrow alleys lit by dim gas lamps. The roads were uneven and muddy. The air smelled of coal smoke, horse manure, refuse, and factories. Crime was common and violence was part of daily life. For many women, prostitution wasn't a career. It was a means of surviving one more night. Into this world stepped a killer. A man who would become more famous than almost any murderer in history. A man whose real name we still don't know. The world remembers him by the signature that appeared in a letter sent during the investigation, Jack the Ripper. The district was one of the poorest parts of London. Waves of immigrants had settled there over decades, creating a densely populated neighborhood where jobs were scarce and living conditions were harsh. A laborer might earn only enough to pay for a bed in a crowded lodging house. If work disappeared for a few days, so did the roof over their head. Many lodging houses charged by the night. If someone couldn't pay a few pennies before closing time, they were turned away. This created a desperate cycle. Some women who had lost husbands, jobs, or homes would spend the evening searching for customers simply to earn enough money for a place to sleep. Many of the Ripper's victims fit this pattern. They were not wealthy socialites or famous figures. They were among society's most vulnerable people. Victorian policing was very different from what we know today. There were no fingerprints, no DNA testing, and no CCTV cameras, and no emergency phone calls. If detectives wanted evidence, they relied on witnesses, footprints, clothing, handwritten notes, and luck. The Metropolitan Police patrolled Whitechapel, while the neighboring city of London Police covered a smaller jurisdiction. Communication between agencies wasn't always smooth. Crime scenes were often crowded with curious onlookers before investigators could properly examine them. Evidence could easily be disturbed or lost. Long before the famous murders began, violence against women in Whitechapel was tragically common. Robberies, domestic assaults, street attacks, most never made national headlines. But during the spring and summer of 1888, detectives noticed something unsettling. Several attacks seemed unusually violent. Some historians point to 2 women as possible early victims. On April 3, 1888, Emma Smith was brutally assaulted while walking through Whitechapel. She survived long enough to tell authorities that several men had attacked her. She died from her injuries the following day. Most historians do not believe Jack the Ripper killed Emma Smith because her attack appears to have involved a group rather than a lone offender. Still, her death highlighted how dangerous Whitechapel had become. 4 months later, another woman was found murdered. Her name was Martha Tabram. Excuse me if I'm saying that wrong. She had been stabbed dozens of times. Unlike Emma Smith, this attack involved extraordinary violence. Could Martha have been Jack's first victim? Experts remain divided. Some believe the attack was too different from the later murders. Others think serial killers often evolve, meaning Martha could represent an earlier stage before the killer settled into the pattern seen later. There is no consensus. August 31st, 1888. Everything changed just before dawn. A carman named Charles Cross was walking to work along Bucks Row. The streets were quiet. Gas lamps cast weak pulls of light across the road. As he approached, he noticed what looked like a bundle lying in the darkness. It wasn't a bundle. It was a woman. She was lying on her back. Another passerby, Robert Paul, soon arrived. Together, they examined her briefly, but believed she might still be alive. Unable to fully appreciate the extent of her injuries in the darkness, they continued on and alerted a police officer. When officers returned to the scene, they discovered the truth. The woman was dead. Her name was Mary Ann Nichols. Her throat had been cut. Further examination revealed injuries to her abdomen. The killer had attacked swiftly and disappeared into the maze of Whitechapel streets before anyone realized what had happened. At first, police did not know whether this was an isolated murder or the beginning of something far worse. They would soon find out. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood. Who had seen Nichols alive? Who had spoken with her? Where had she spent the evening? Witnesses reported that she had been trying to earn enough money for a night's lodging after being turned away because she lacked the required payment. The timeline narrowed. Somewhere in the early morning darkness between her last confirmed sighting and the discovery of her body, she encountered her killer. There were no reliable descriptions, no obvious murder weapon, no clear suspects, only questions. Questions that would multiply every passing week. September 1888. The murder of Mary Ann Nichols had unsettled Whitechapel, but many officers still hoped it was an isolated crime. Violent deaths were sadly not unheard of in the East End. Detectives had seen robberies turn deadly, domestic disputes escalate, and gang violence claim lives. But there were details about Nichols' murder that didn't fit those patterns. The attack appeared focused. It happened quickly. There was no clear sign of robbery as the motive. The victim seemed to have been chosen because she was vulnerable and alone. Still, one murder does not prove the existence of a serial killer. The police increased patrols. Life continued for just over a week. Saturday, September 8th, 1888. As dawn approached, a resident entered the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. Instead of an empty yard, he found the body of a woman near the back steps. Her name was Annie Chapman. Police immediately noticed similarities to the Nichols case. The throat had been cut, and there were additional injuries that suggested the killer had spent time at the scene after the victim had died. Investigators debated whether this indicated an anatomical knowledge or simply increasing confidence. Modern experts remain divided on that question. The similarities convinced senior detectives that they were almost certainly dealing with the same offender. The fear spreading through Whitechapel was no longer speculation. A serial killer was hunting women in the East End. One detective quickly emerged as a central figure in the investigation: Frederick Aberline. Aberline had spent years policing Whitechapel before being promoted. He knew its streets, lodging houses, and most of the local residents. Unlike detectives arriving from wealthier districts, Aberline understood how easy it was for someone to disappear into the neighborhood. He interviewed witnesses personally and pursued leads that others might have dismissed. Although films often portray him as the lead detective throughout the case, the real investigation involved many officers and multiple police departments. As newspapers searched for answers, one name dominated the headlines: Leather Apron. Rumors spread that a rough-looking man wearing a leather apron had been threatening local women. Soon, people began blaming him for every attack in Whitechapel. Crowds formed. People whispered warnings. Some residents became afraid of anyone matching the vague description. Eventually, police arrested a local boot finisher named John Pizer. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. The newspapers celebrated. Surely they had caught Jack the Ripper. But they hadn't. Pizer had strong alibis for the murders and was released. Again, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. His reputation, however, had already been badly damaged by sensational reporting. It was an early lesson in how public fear and media attention can overwhelm solid investigative work. One of the biggest frustrations for detectives was that Whitechapel was never truly empty. Even in the early morning hours, people were moving through the streets: market workers, night watchmen, dock laborers, residents returning to lodging houses. Yet no one could provide a clear, constant description of the killer. Some witnesses recalled seeing a man speaking with one of the victims. Others remembered someone walking away from the area. The descriptions widely varied: tall, short, well-dressed, poorly dressed, with a mustache, without one. Modern investigators believe many of these sightings were likely unrelated to the murders. Once a neighborhood is gripped by fear, ordinary encounters can suddenly seem significant. Whitechapel under siege. After Chapman's murder, panic intensified. Women began avoiding dark alleys whenever possible. Some refused to walk alone. The Whitechapel Vigilance Committee formed, made up of local residents determined to protect their neighborhood. Members patrolled the streets at night carrying whistles and lanterns. Some even offered rewards for information. Frustrated that official reward policies were inconsistent, the pressure on Scotland Yard grew by the day. The newspapers. The Victorian press transformed the investigation into an international sensation. Every rumor became a headline. Every anonymous letter became potential evidence. Readers across Britain and beyond followed each new development. The intense coverage had mixed effects. On one hand, it encouraged witnesses to come forward. On the other, it flooded police with false tips, mistaken identities, and hoax confessions. Detectives spent valuable time chasing leads that went nowhere. By mid-September, investigators were considering several possibilities. Theory 1, a local resident. The killer seemed to know Whitechapel well enough to escape quickly through the maze of its streets. Theory 2, a traveler. Some believed he could have been a sailor or laborer whose movements made him difficult to trace. Theory 3. Someone with anatomical experience. Because of the nature of some injuries, a few investigators suggested the killer might have had experience as a butcher, slaughterhouse worker, or in a medical profession. Later, forensic reviews have questioned whether the evidence actually supports advanced medical training. No single theory fit all the facts. A killer growing bolder. What worried detectives most was timing. Only 8 days separated the murders of Nichols and Chapman. If the same man was responsible, his confidence appeared to be increasing. He was taking greater risks, operating closer to homes, leaving before police could arrive, and showing no sign of stopping. The question wasn't whether he would kill again, it was when, and whether the police could reach him first. They wouldn't. Within weeks, Whitechapel would witness one of the most infamous nights in criminal history, a night that investigators would forever call the double event. 2 murders, 1 killer, less than an hour apart, and the first appearance of the name that history would never forget, Jack the Ripper. In part 2, we'll reconstruct the night of September 30th, 1888, the double event, cover the murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, examine the mysterious Goulston Street message, and explore the Dear Boss letter that introduced the world to the name Jack the Ripper.